has increased and extended the quarantine period of those in isolation by 14 more days, bringing the total number of days to 28. Let's now bring in our medical journalist, that is Dr. Masi Korir, to explain more on that. Dr. Masi, I trust you well. Is there justification for the extension of this quarantine period?
From the government side, Ashley, they are saying that there are people who did not observe the quarantine measures that are there, that is maintaining physical distancing and the other hygiene measures. They were interacting with themselves or amongst themselves, and that's why in those particular quarantine facilities where some people turned positive, then the government is asking the rest, or rather has given an order for the rest of the people in that quarantine facility to be on quarantine for another additional 14 days. So the challenge with this is I'm still finding it hard to understand, or trying to find a basis for it, because I would think that those that have tested negative will complete their 14 days quarantine. If they haven't been symptomatic, they can be released to go home, and even when they are going home, they can be asked to log in their temperatures or report what is happening to them as a follow-up while they are at home. And then those who are positive are the ones who are supposed to now go for isolation. Here, Ashley, let me just quickly just differentiate between quarantine and isolation. Quarantine is for the persons who are high risk or suspected cases who haven't been tested yet, or whose status is unknown. So you've been quarantined for 14 days, and the 14 days is because this coronavirus is thought to have an incubation period of between 1 day to 14 days. But most people have been shown to be symptomatic around the 5th or the 6th day of this particular incubation period. So you'd expect that if none of them has been symptomatic, and this some on their 10th day, 11th day, 12th day of quarantine, then we would assume that since they also tested negative, then they are unlikely to have the virus, and therefore they can go and continue with quarantine at home. Those who have tested positive are the ones who now go into isolation. And isolation here now means you have been confirmed to have the virus, and therefore more measures need to be put in place. You need to be monitored more keenly, because now of the effects of this virus, especially when it causes pneumonia and causes acute respiratory distress. So there is a lot of things we are yet to understand from the government, and why this particular measure has been put in place to extend the quarantine by another 14 days, which really may not make a lot of sense. But in my own thinking, I'm thinking probably the government is thinking if they have interacted with some of the other people who have turned positive, then they would want to start them again, like on a day 1 now, and count another 14 days, because now you assume that now today is day 1 of contact, and so you have another 14 days. So I think here, probably the CS for Health, Mutahi Kagwe, and his team of medics should come out clearly and explain to us and Kenyans, so that we understand the scientific basis of this, or if there's any data or any proof that all the people who are in quarantine did not actually observe the measures that had been put in place, so that we can now begin to understand why these measures are like this. And I think it is more imperative for them to explain, because it comes with cost implications for people. Some I've seen somebody saying they've a family of 4 or 5 people, their cost is 400,000 for the 14 days. So another additional 14 days will cost them another 400,000, and at the end of 1 month is 1 million Kenya shillings, about thereabout. So really, I think we need better understanding from government and the medics behind the CS, because he said he was advised by the medics to explain to us and especially those people in quarantine, why this particular measure. But we are still trying to figure it out and wrap our heads around it to see if it's fair, if it makes any scientific sense, any medical sense, any public health sense. Then we would gladly oblige, Ashley.
All right. As you've mentioned, cost is one of the concerns. Then how are other countries handling this particular problem?
Anyone who's been on mandatory quarantine, especially the travelers, we've seen they are on mandatory quarantine, or which they foot the bill themselves. So we've seen, I think a good example is Uganda, where they asked everyone to, if you're going into quarantine, it's on your own bill. And this we can explain, especially because of the risk to the rest of the public. It's a matter of public interest, so we can understand. But here, I think the costs in this case should have been negotiated so that they are reasonable for people who are going into quarantine. Other countries who now have certain systems in place monitor people in such a way that even like I've seen one of the East Asian countries where you're actually tracked and monitored via phone. And if your phone goes off, even if it goes off, they assume you have, they would think that you have broken one of the rules of self-quarantine, and you'd find public health officials at your doorstep. In other countries, they would know when you've stepped out of the house, when you're supposed to be in quarantine, and there are punitive penalties to go with that. So in countries where there are stricter measures of enforcing quarantine, people have actually done so in their homes, and we've seen some have been successful, and even in some countries, even if somebody falls sick, they can self-isolate at home, and they can be managed, and they can do home-based care at home for the coronavirus, and after 7 or 14 days they are well and they're up and about. So here, I think for us it has been a problem of the systems and enforcing some of these measures that made it difficult initially for people to have stayed away and not interacted with the public for 14 days. And therefore, this particular cohort of 2,000 people then found themselves having to undergo mandatory quarantine for the 14 days. But now this additional 14 days is the one thing that is controversial, and it's a bit thorny, that we hope even tomorrow or before the start of the week, we would have an answer from the Ministry of Health. Ashley.
All right. The CS of Health, Mutahi Kagwe, has also announced and ordered people to wear masks, especially if you're going to supermarkets and open-air markets using public transport and so on. Most people are wondering, masks are not something that we're used to. Very, very uncomfortable at first. But then what about the people who have asthma or just other illnesses altogether? How do they cope?
Well, you've said it quite rightly. Masks are uncomfortable. Even I myself, even the days when I was in theater and operating, after your surgery, you just want to get rid of that mask because it covers your mouth, your nose. It's not really the best gadget to have on your face, because it's uncomfortable. And especially now that Kenyans are free to make masks of any material, as long as it's something that covers your nose and mouth, I'm sure we'll get some that are awfully uncomfortable. But here, it is just to help Kenyans, especially those that might be sick and they don't know, from coughing out, sneezing out any of the droplets and contaminating surfaces. That is one. And also for anyone who is near that kind of person, from getting the droplets to themselves. Masks in itself are not the answer for the coronavirus. And I think WHO has been very categorical, and so far they've not issued any advice that masks will serve to prevent one contracting the coronavirus, as opposed to these other hygiene measures and physical distancing, because we know the coronavirus is not airborne. So the masks are just to sort of as an addition to all these other measures. But now the trick here is, as a country, we are not used to having or to putting on masks, as opposed to some of the East Asian countries where there's a high rate of pollution, so they're used to putting on masks. So that's one. Two is the risk of contamination by the same people here who are using masks, because if you have put on your mask the whole day and you still touch your mask, you put it, and I've seen even government officials wearing the masks around the chins, or you've dropped it onto your chest, so it's onto your clothes. So if it was contaminated at any one point, then you have put whatever it had contaminated it onto your clothes or onto your beard for men, or onto your body. If you touch the outside of the mask and you touch your eyes, nose or mouth, then you have contaminated yourself. So it is a catch-22 situation where proper use of the masks might add to the benefit of reducing and limiting the spread or the transmission of coronavirus, but the improper use of the mask then may cause more harm than good. Now, the last thing here is how do we sanitize this mask? Because some will be cloth masks, some are supposed to be one-use masks that can be, they are supposed to be changed every so often. So there are lots of things that this mass use of masks will bring to the public. So here we have to really tread carefully and have people remember that the use of the mask alone is not the answer to spreading or limiting limiting transmission of the coronavirus from one person to the next.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Masi Korir, for that. Just giving some insights on what we're supposed to do and not to do, especially when using these masks. We take a short break here on Weekend Prime. We still have more stories on the other side. Stay with us.